if you're not using analytics, then the decisions that you're making are going to be essentially random decisions that may not be optimized. And that will be at the detriment to whatever your business interest is, collections or otherwise.
Hey everyone, it's Ashley with Arbeit. We are back with another episode of Arbeit U. And today we are going to be speaking on how to improve data analytics with a small team. And we have a first time guest today. I'm really excited to hear from him. We have Jed Baker. He's the director in data science at Midland Credit Management, an Encore Capital Group company. And we are also both attending Armtech next week. He'll be speaking on advanced data analytics at a session on Friday at 10 a.m. So I can't wait to listen to that. And thank you so much again for joining us today and speaking a little bit on data analytics before that.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Of course. So before we get into data analytics, can you please give us just a little background on you and your company for people who may not be familiar?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Ashley said, I'm Jed Baker. I am a director of data science and statistics at Midland Credit Management, which is the US kind of arm of Encore Capital Group. And I've been in the collection space for about 10 years, which is half or so of my career. I've worked in some other industries too, in analytics and outside of financial services. I've also worked in automotive analytics as well as real estate analytics. And then I teach at the college level on the side.
Cool. Data analytics is definitely something that a lot of people use and also a lot of people don't use. So, getting into that side of things, can you just give an overview of data analytics, why it's important to you, and why it should be important to others as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that as we all know, analytics and data have become just it exploded in terms of accessibility and call it ease of use education over probably the past 10 years. I think that is any organization, whether it's in the collection space or it's in financial services or any other space, as an organization evolves, the importance of analytics becomes more and more prevalent, largely because when we think about what we have to do and whether it's how we're going to service an account or it's how we're going to market a product, everything should be informed based on what your historical experience is with that particular product. One of the things that will eventually happen is that you'll bump up against a constraint, and those constraints will require you to make decisions. And if you're not using analytics, then the decisions that you're making are going to be essentially random decisions that may not be optimized. And that will be at the detriment to whatever your business interest is, collections or otherwise.
Got it. And I know today we're talking about small teams and using data
Yep.
analytics. And I know sometimes smaller teams, it's a little bit harder to implement stuff like this. So, what would you say are some common challenges that small debt collection teams face when implementing data analytics solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that one of there's a number of challenges with small teams. And I think that the first area is like, where do you apply it? One of the things that whether you're a small organization with two people or you're a really large organization is where is my best use for this tool? So it's an investment. So I'm going to invest the resource of whether it's the analyst or the data scientist working on it. I'm going to invest money in setting up an environment to be able to do the analysis. You're going to come to a point where you need to figure out where's the best place to put that investment resource.
Yep.
And one of the big challenges there is businesses, oftentimes we're always running really fast. And so to cost yourself something in order to take one step back, to taking one step back to take five steps forward, initially may not feel good because every dollar counts and every day that dollar doesn't come in, it can also be painful or problematic, is really figuring out the right place to put it. And oftentimes that's going to be where is my big, and so for smaller teams, what I usually will suggest or what in the past, what I've done is try to identify what is it that is of highest value to the business today. Because if I'm doing something that doesn't have high value to the business, whether it's especially with a small team, it's going to be difficult to get higher level buy-in on that particular initiative. And so it's really making sure that you align your initial kind of strategy with what your business leaders care most about, and then making sure that you're executing on that and showing value when you see it.
Yeah. And that ties into this next question actually really well. So it's obviously a lot of the times resources are just limited in small teams, right? They can't get all these cool data analytics software as bigger agencies may be able to. So are there any like specific things that you would say that small teams should prioritize with data analytics or something that they should focus on first with implementing this?
Absolutely. There's different avenues that you can go down, but I think that the first step really is to build out a strong reporting structure and a way to capture the data that you're generating. And I think that when it comes to analytics, you really can't. So if I decide today, if it's me and one other person, I want to start doing analytics today,
Mhm.
and I haven't done anything to collect data and I don't have any repository where I can source the data from, I'm going to end up with a bigger problem, which is I can't do anything. The first thing is to to coordinate with your stakeholders to figure out what are the important questions to be asked and to be answered. And then how do you then go and make sure that you have the information to be able to answer that? That's step one, is really just making sure that you have that kind of in place. Step two then is to come up with a way that tells a story. So your data should always tell a story, because if you're not super technical, or if you're talking to an audience that has a higher scope of kind of work that's not as in the weeds as the analytics folks are, then you're going to need to tell a story at a bit higher level view. And so starting point should always be, I have my data somewhere. Now let me visualize it and tell a story. And if that data exists somewhere and you can tell a story, then you start to get people interested in it, because you'll, by definition, without anything advanced, without anything forward looking, start to generate insights and information for the business.
Got it. And you mentioned taking one step back to be able to take five steps forward. How do you get leaders in a small environment to buy into this if they don't see the value?
Yeah, that's where some of the creativity in the analytics space comes in. And what on my career, what I've done and what I advocate that kind of junior folks do is sometimes you have to take some of your own time to build out a proof of concept on something. Now, obviously you can't spend your full day working on things if it's not, hasn't been bought into by the organization yet. But oftentimes you can come up with basic proofs of concept where you say, look, here's a structure. Here's what I think will be able to result. Here's the results that I think that we'll be able to achieve, and come up with kind of a straw man, which is essentially, here's what we're doing. If we do something this way, I think that we could increase collections, we could reduce expenses or save time by X%. And even if the high end looks like this, maybe the low end looks like this, and you can put expected dollar values to it, and those will generally always be greater than zero. Then you can start to get the interest of the organization to say, you know what, yeah, that is worth some of my time and energy to put that into it. And that
Yeah.
will then build newer and more kind of, that will build the belief in what you're doing to allow you to do other things that may take a little more time and may then cost a little bit money. But if you're
Yeah.
generating that money, then it becomes a little bit easier to sell the organization on.
It's worth it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Now, speaking of spending the money and dollar amounts and stuff like that, are there any specific data analytics tools or strategies that could be particularly effective for small teams? Like any cost effective or free data analytics tools that are worth using?
Absolutely.
Not
There's
trying to name drop, but
Yeah, no, that's so I think that there's again, as analytics and data science has exploded, that really what has emerged from that is this of both analytical methods as well as analytical tools. So there are tons of open source resources out there for organizations to use, whether it's Python or R, or if you don't have folks that are really strong with a strong programming background, you can use something like Orange, or things like Microsoft Excel are really good starting points, because almost every organization is going to have Microsoft Office, and there's things that you can do within Excel that are easy to implement, not a big expense in the tool up front, at least not an incremental expense. One of the challenges that one may face is with open source, oftentimes you don't get the scale. So if you have a really large data set, oftentimes it's not as easy to take a really large data set and put it into the free version. So then you start to run into some cost constraints. And that's where kind of cloud becomes really prevalent. So you have Amazon Web Services, AWS, you have Microsoft Azure, you have Google Cloud. So there's a bunch of different tools that can be used that allow you to incrementally buy what you need and then get rid of it when you don't need it. So maybe I need to do something that's going to take, that requires a lot of data at the beginning or requires a lot of computing power at the beginning. I don't have to necessarily go invest in a bunch of infrastructure to be able to support that. I can literally subscribe into this cloud service, pay for the use that I have on that machine, and then turn it off and go back down to a machine that's a little bit that is either something that we already have on premises or something that is more cost effective in the cloud space.
Cool. I'm learning too. So this is cool. There's so many different options. But yeah, I know Excel. I feel like a lot of people don't think of Excel, but there's so many things that Excel can actually do to track and stuff. It's so easy to do. But yeah,
And even if you don't have Excel, and again, there really is a function of how small or how large your team is. But things like the Google's, I forgot what it's called, Google Pages or whatever, there are a lot of function. Google Sheets, yes. Google Sheets has a lot of the same functionality that Excel has. Maybe not as powerful. As your data gets larger, it becomes a little bit prohibitive from just a implementation perspective. When you think about, I want to put something in at scale, at some point I'm going to have to make an investment. But there are little things that you can do if you're at ground zero that aren't going to be a really big expense and will really help you sell the concept to the broader organization. Even if it's a small organization, even if you're selling it, if it's a 5-person organization in total and you have to go sell it to the CEO who's the owner of the company, right? That's a good, what I recommend is starting points. One other thing, and this may be a question that's coming up, so if I jump ahead, I'm sorry. But when it comes to what the actual, so let's say you get buy-in and you say, okay, here are some possible questions that we want to answer. What I will usually try to, and whether it's at a large organization where you're trying to do something unique and new and maybe has not been done before, or you're trying to do your very first thing, is to start with a bigger question. A lot of times when you try to come up with things, you're like, we could do all of these different things, right? Whether if it's in lettering or if it's in calling or if it's in emails, whatever the case may be, there's a bunch of different things that one can do. And you may want to answer every question all at once, but answering every question all at once isn't going to be feasible at the beginning. So what you want to do is really start at the highest level and think about it like a funnel. I want to answer the really big questions first to give myself yes or no on this. Then I can go and say, okay, I know that this one worked better. So now let me try another variation of that. So if you start big and you start and you refine it, you can really generate more insights. Whereas what most people will want to do is answer all the questions up front, and you end up not answering any questions if you take that approach, or you don't answer them.
Yeah, for sure. I this next question is, I guess, a little bit more specific, and I think this also may help once you figure out KPIs, exactly what you want to actually track. So are there like certain KPIs that small debt collection teams should track to regularly improve their effectiveness? And I'll kind of more questions to it, but I guess I'll just start there.
Yeah, it's really, yes, it is. That's the question, right?
Yeah,
That
right.
you're really trying to do is, what am I tracking? And I would say it really depends on what the business is. What is their niche or what's their nuance that they're servicing to? So what we're seeing at ArmTech, and you're seeing all over the place, is a lot of digital companies that are digitizing interactions with consumers.
Yeah.
In that case, it's probably going to be very heavy to email marketing and responses that you get from those emails. And I think that whatever your particular strategy is, or whatever strategy that you're building the analytical tool for, you want to make sure that tool is generating a result that is trackable and can be generalized to larger parts of the business. Now, for most of us, it's going to be it's either dollars or it's responses, right? Irrespective of what the business is, right? Whether if we're emailing for credit cards or we're trying to get people to buy products from us, it's going to really have to do with what is the end goal that you want your consumer to achieve, and then track that. Another nuance of that is to ensure that you have a way to compare your new thing, right? The new thing that you're trying to do with whatever your business as usual strategy is. Because if you're saying, okay, this is great, but I've done this to everything, now you don't know if it's actually generating incremental value or if it's just doing the same thing, in which case you would want to change that. So creating a good kind of controlled environment where you can compare what you're doing to your baseline is going to be a really important piece as well.
Yeah, and that kind of rolls into these next questions where it's how do you know if your data is good or if you're tracking the right data and how to track the ROI on a project like that. So it sounds like doing an A and B testing or at least comparing to what you were doing before to make sure that what you're doing now is actually working.
And I think that where a lot of collections folks are really proficient at is kind of understanding what their costs are and going, look, I know what I'm paying for either what I'm paying to service or purchase portfolios. So I know that, so having a really fundamental understanding of what your costs are is going to be really important, because if you don't understand what the thing is costing you, it's very difficult to understand if the net value that you're getting from it is better than what you were doing before. And so really good example of that where things can really get out of hand is in the cloud environment. If you say, I can do all of this and I don't have to buy anything, but my monthly subscription costs are skyrocketing. Well, you may need some controls in place to make sure that you're maintaining a kind of a cost, some conscientiousness to what the costs are. And I think that's pretty common sense. I think most people will be connected to that, but really it's a matter of taking those things that you're doing and understanding what are the benefits that you're getting from them. And then what are the costs associated with those in order to understand if there's really business value that's being added with this new kind of strategy. And that's really the whole point of all of this, is to understand so we don't do analytics for analytics sake, right? We don't do it just because like we might as well. It's really to tell a story about what's happening in our business.
Yeah.
And if you see that your business is skyrocketing as a result of some action that you've taken, you want to be able to know that's happening. And the sooner that you do it, the better. And so
Yeah.
a lot of what step one, first and second steps are is to make sure that you are tracking those things so that you can see it more quickly, and that you can also course correct if you see that it's actually not working, as opposed to having to wait a much, longer time interval to understand what that looks like.
Yeah. Awesome. And speaking of the debt collection space and all of that, we know compliance is a huge thing in this industry. How can does or I guess how or does data analytics intersect with compliance when dealing with sensitive customer information?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is, we are all experiencing that on a daily basis. I think that analytics can really help you with that, because it will allow you to, so I don't, I shouldn't need to use any person's information to create a report, right? I can create something that's based on some, I don't really, on average, I want to look at what a particular analytical project is returning. I don't really two things. I don't really need to know much about a individual consumer in order to understand that. And I think more broadly, what it allows you to do is, when you get a little bit more mature in the evolution of your analytics strategy, is you have data that can be stored in a place that is secure. You can control access to it. You can control read, write, execute access to it. Your analysts can then go and pull only what the business has determined is they're allowed to use. And then from there, it creates a really nice kind of barrier between sensitive information that you don't want to be out there, but still being able to access data to generate some insights. And so
Yeah.
I think that analytics is a really strong way to help enhance your compliance practices as opposed to being something that you can think of as being an incremental cost of doing business. And it's both, but it can really help in terms of any potential issues that we all want to avoid.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that alone is like a selling point for
Mhm.
collection agencies.
Yeah,
If it's compliant, you got better use data analytics.
absolutely, absolutely.
And so could you share or do you know of any success stories or case studies of small debt collection teams that have significantly improved their results through data analytics efforts?
I think just if we look at if you look at all of the companies that are going to be at ArmTech and you see at how many companies that are approaching a digital first strategy, whether it's through contact, whether it's through using conversational AI, whether it's through account flows, I think that the sheer volume of these companies that have come onto the market and appear to be doing really strong speaks to the fact that analytics is a really strong selling point in a collection space. So you don't necessarily need to understand specifics around collections to understand what it means to interact with your consumer. And so in that case, I think that just the volume of these companies being out there and being viable and being at ArmTech to share their stories is a really strong kind of a strong selling point to investment in analytic strategies for an organization.
Yeah, definitely. I know like technology just in general in collections is a little slow to adopt in some agencies, but it definitely seems like it is going in the right direction finally with all of these different softwares out there that can just help their business digitally and moving in that direction.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's totally the case. That's what's really cool about ArmTech is it really brings the focus of the technology piece, whether it's analytics, whether it's tools, whether it's business cases, really brings it to the forefront of how much it's transforming the space, how much it
Yeah.
has transformed the space.
Yeah, definitely. So we're getting to the end here, but I just wanted to ask you, are you seeing any emerging trends or innovations in data analytics to be aware of, or maybe having agencies consider adopting?
I think that one of the big ones that's come to the forefront for all of us in recent years is the kind of immersion of the large language models like ChatGPT. And I think that those are, and we actually are going to have, I forgot the name of the company, but one of them is going to be that focuses exclusively on that's going to be at ArmTech. And I think that's an area that's going to be it's going to be tough for for smaller, uh, companies to implement. But I think that is definitely an emerging technology that's going to have another kind of transformational impact on the industry for sure.
Yeah, it's great. I just used it today, actually.
Yeah, that's good. That's great. It's a great tool.
Yeah, that's so funny. Awesome. Just recap and take it from here. Is there, I guess, what is your biggest key takeaway that we talked about today that you would want small collection teams to take back and take with them and consider doing with data analytics?
Yeah, I think it's really starting with start small. You don't have to invest a ton at first, but starting small, align with what the business is tracking to, align your tool or your analytical project with something you're going to get buy-in on, because that feeds future buy-in. If you can answer a question that's really important, and then start with the highest level questions first, and then from there you can refine it. But don't try to answer every question. You're going to end up answering. You're not going to answer any question really well.
All right. So now this is going to be on LinkedIn. Everyone's going to watch it. Everyone's going to think it's the best video they've ever watched. So where
Maybe
can
because of you, not because of me.
where can people find you? Or if they maybe have questions or they want to learn more about data analytics, where can they find you? And is there a specific that is good to work with you, or can anyone really reach out with
I would
you?
just reach out. You can. I'm happy to talk to anybody, and if you put my LinkedIn profile, I think the best way is just to message me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to connect. Absolutely.
All right. Anyone watching this, we will both be at Arm Tech next week. Jed will be speaking on Friday at 10 a.m. about advanced data analytics. So this is just a little sneak peek. So if you want more information, definitely attend his session. And Jed, thank you again so much for joining us today. And I'm looking forward to meeting you in person next week.
Thanks. Likewise, Ashley. See you next week.